The Woman in White. It was a cold winter day. Snow fell from the sky like feathers, covering the whole town, and a biting coldness filled the air. There were almost no pedestrians on the streets, and only a few cars occasionally drove by, leaving long tire tracks. This town, with a small population, was quiet and somewhat depressing. Most of the time, people in the town lived simple and ordinary lives until that night in winter. I, at that time, was just a 13-year-old girl who had just entered puberty, with eyes full of curiosity about the world. I always liked to sneak out into the streets at night to watch the vehicles and pedestrians hurrying by. To me, the world was full of unknowns, and I was eager to learn more. That night, I was waiting for a bus at the bus stop in the town center as usual. It was a chilly winter's night. The neon lights on the platform flickered erratically, and hardly anyone stopped. Time passed slowly as I stood there, the snow already trampled under my feet, but still snowflakes gently drifted down, covering my hair and shoulders. I wondered if maybe I should take this time to go home before I froze to death. But I knew very well that the last bus from the station was coming and I didn't want to miss it. Finally, after a long time, that train appeared at a distant intersection and slowly pulled in. The headlights were like two huge eyes illuminating the front. At that moment, even though the body appeared old, an inexplicable excitement surged through me. I walked up, ready to join the waiting queue. The people on the platform didn't say much. Everyone lined up consciously without pushing or shoving each other. This was a rare phenomenon. As usually on snowy days, many people get impatient and scramble for the top spot. But not tonight. It was as if everyone was pulled by an invisible force to silently keep to the rules. I followed closely to the back of the queue, my heart filled with impatience. Just as I was waiting anxiously, an unusual image came into my eyes. Two tall men, each standing beside a woman in a long white dress, were carrying her towards the door of the car. The woman's pace was light, and it was almost impossible to tell that there was any strength supporting her body. It was as if she wasn't really walking, but floating in the air, her skirt fluttering in the wind, giving an unreal illusion. My heartbeat suddenly accelerated. Her face was so tightly concealed by her black hair that I could only see her unusually large eyes, which were deep and empty, as if they could penetrate everything. Her gaze sent a chill through me, and an inexplicable fear welled up from deep within. At that moment, I heard a few people around me whispering, "Look, that girl got on the bus again. How strange. How come I always see her?" My heart fluttered, and a horrible thought suddenly surged in my mind. Who the hell is she? Why did everyone turn a blind eye to her? I hurriedly squeezed into the carriage and found a seat by the window. Sitting right in front of those three people, my curiosity instantly exploded, and I strongly wanted to know more. The atmosphere inside the carriage was quiet, with almost no sound except for the sound of the wheels scraping against the snow. Everyone sat in silence, lost in their own thoughts. I couldn't help but turn around and look at the woman in the white dress. She was still sitting quietly, and two tall men were still standing beside her. I settled down, ready to peek at her again. When I turned my head and caught a glimpse of her eyes, my heart almost stopped in that moment. Her eyes, still surprisingly large, and that gaze, instead of being calm and empty, was filled with an indistinct deadness. It was as if that deadness was telling me that these eyes did not belong to a living person, but to some kind of unspeakable being. They stared me dead in the face, penetrating my soul. I turned back around hastily, my mind in turmoil, feeling as if something was pressing down on my chest and my breathing became rapid. I looked down and gripped the armrests of the seat tightly, trying to calm myself down, but nothing helped. Those eyes, like two sharp knives, were firmly embedded into my heart. Time seemed to freeze at that moment. I felt the air around me become heavy, as if an invisible force was pressing down on me. My heart beat faster and faster, and sweat began to gush out unconsciously from my forehead. I couldn't help but turn around and look at her once again, her eyes still staring straight at me. It wasn't an illusion. She was really looking at me. The light in those eyes was cold and unfamiliar, as if it wasn't coming from a living person. An unspeakable fear welled up inside me. I hurriedly got up from my seat and tried to leave, but something seemed to have changed inside the carriage. Outside the windows of the carriage, snow was still falling, yet on the streets, there weren't any other vehicles or pedestrians, as if we were the only ones left in the world. Suddenly, my shoulder was heavily tapped by a hand. My heart almost jumped out of my chest, frightening me so much that I turned back in a hurry. However, when I turned around, I saw nothing. I took a deep breath and immediately decided to get out of the car. The car traveled for an unknown amount of time and finally reached a stop. I quickly stood up and almost ran towards the door. When the door opened with a bang, I jumped down quickly, as if that was the only way to get rid of the invisible oppression. Standing in the snow outside the car, I was shivering with cold, but did not dare to stop, all my legs desperately running forward. Looking back, I could see the car slowly disappearing in the snow, the lights still on in the windows, as if there was still something unspeakable staring at me from that carriage. Just as I was about to run a few blocks away, a low voice suddenly came from behind me. "Hey, miss, is everything okay?" I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart almost beating out of my chest. I turned to look. A man in a police uniform stood behind me. His face was serious and his eyes were deep. "What did you see?" The policeman's voice was low and calm. I froze, my head was in chaos, and I hurriedly nodded. "Yes, just now on that car. I saw that girl in the white dress. Her eyes are not right." The policeman sighed, his gaze becoming more complicated. "You're not the first person to see her. Recently, there have been several people who have seen something similar in that car. Everyone had a different experience, but without exception, they all mentioned those eyes. You, on the other hand, were most fortunate to get out of the car in time. So, who is she then?" Couldn't help but ask. The policeman was silent for a moment and whispered, Perhaps she is no longer human." He sighed and turned to leave, while I stood in place, my heart still beating wildly, the image of those eyes constantly echoing in my mind. It was as if that white-skirted woman, that inescapable presence, was still watching me from the darkness. The truth of it all, however, remained unknown.